Here is something that does not get talked about enough. Nvidia is the most dominant company in the AI hardware race, but it has one weakness: high bandwidth memory, which Nvidia does not make, cannot make, and right now can barely get enough of. And China just spent billions of dollars targeting exactly that gap. The country that was supposedly being contained by technology restrictions has just signed a nearly $3 billion memory deal, filed for a $4 billion stock market listing, and converted tens of thousands of production wafers toward the exact product that sits at Nvidia's most exposed point. None of it secret, all of it public. It just wasn't being watched because most people covering the chip war were staring somewhere else entirely. Let's get into why this matters. To understand the story, you first need to understand the problem. Nvidia builds the most powerful AI chips in the world. That is not in dispute. Its Blackwell architecture, its software ecosystem, its relationships with cloud providers, all of it is genuinely dominant. But here is the part that does not make it into most headlines. A GPU does not run alone. It needs memory sitting right next to it, feeding it data fast enough to keep all those transistors busy. Not ordinary memory, not the kind in your laptop. A specialized, stacked, extraordinarily expensive type of memory called high bandwidth memory, or HBM. Think of it this way: the GPU is a fire truck purpose-built to pump enormous volumes of water. But if the hose feeding it is too narrow, it does not matter how powerful the pump is. HBM is the hose. And without it, Nvidia's most advanced chips are essentially idle. Here's where the numbers get uncomfortable. A single enterprise AI system built around Nvidia's best GPU requires 768 individual memory dies just for the high bandwidth memory alone. Every one of those dies comes from one of three companies: Samsung, SK Hynix, Micron. Three companies control more than 95% of the world's high bandwidth memory supply. And right now, in 2026, all three are sold out. Every major supplier has committed its entire output through the end of the year. DRAM prices have surged nearly 95% in a single quarter. And Nvidia, the most valuable chip company on Earth, has been forced to cut production of its own consumer gaming cards by 30 to 40% because the memory those cards need is being consumed by AI customers who are paying more for it. That is the structural weakness at the center of the story. Not transistors, not lithography. Memory. Nvidia depends on a product it doesn't control, made by a group of suppliers so concentrated that any disruption anywhere in the chain goes straight to Nvidia's doorstep first. And the reason that concentration exists comes down to one decision those three suppliers made when AI took off. High bandwidth memory generates 3 to 5 times the profit margin of conventional memory. So Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron did exactly what any rational business would do. They pivoted. They converted production capacity toward HBM, away from ordinary server memory, laptop memory, and smartphone memory. High bandwidth memory now consumes roughly 23% of the world's total DRAM wafer capacity. Every wafer that goes toward it is a wafer that doesn't produce the standard products that everyone else in the technology industry depends on. The premium segment expanded, everything else tightened, and the moment that happened, a gap opened up, a real commercial gap that a company in Hefei, China spent a decade positioning itself to fill. Changxin Memory Technologies was founded in 2016. For most of its existence, the story was simple. A state-backed Chinese company trying to compete in a market dominated by Korean and American giants, burning through billions in losses, while the technological distance between itself and the leaders stayed stubbornly large. The chip industry wasn't dismissive exactly, it just wasn't particularly worried. CXMT was perpetually behind, perpetually loss-making, and perpetually described as something to watch rather than something to respond to. Then 2025 arrived, then 2026, and the company that looked like a footnote started looking like a headline. CXMT turned its first annual profit in 2025 after nearly a decade of losses. That alone would be notable. What happened next was genuinely remarkable. In the first quarter of 2026, the company reported revenue of 50.8 billion yuan, approximately $7 billion, up 719% compared to the same period a year earlier. Net profit hit nearly 25 billion yuan in that single quarter. Its global DRAM market share roughly doubled in 12 months, from around 3% to around 8%. And on June 29, 2026, Reuters reported that CXMT had signed a long-term server memory supply deal with Tencent Holdings worth nearly $3 billion. Now here's what's important to understand. This didn't happen because CXMT suddenly built better chips than Samsung. It happened because Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron left a gap, and CXMT was the only company at scale that could fill it. When the big three pivoted toward high bandwidth memory, they deprioritized conventional server memory, the ordinary DDR5 products that data centers, cloud platforms, and enterprise customers still need in enormous quantities. Supply tightened, prices surged. Buyers who had always called Samsung or SK Hynix suddenly found those companies less focused on their needs. And CXMT, which had been steadily building conventional DRAM capacity for years, found itself holding supply in a market that had run out of it. That's the opening, not a technology breakthrough, a market realignment that created a window for a supplier that was previously easy to overlook. But the part of the story that demands the most attention is not the conventional memory business. It is what CXMT is doing with the capital that business is now generating. The company has announced that roughly 20% of its total DRAM production capacity, approximately 60,000 wafers per month, is being converted toward high bandwidth memory, specifically HBM3, the generation currently powering most operational AI accelerators. Simultaneously, CXMT has broken ground on a new facility in Shanghai, specifically focused on high bandwidth memory packaging. Once that plant and other expansions come online, its total monthly wafer output is projected to nearly double, from around 300,000 wafers to approximately 600,000. And the company is funding all of this with a 29.5 billion yuan IPO on Shanghai's Star Market, around $4 billion, with nearly 70% of the proceeds going directly into wafer production expansion and advanced memory research. That is not a research project. That is an industrial construction program pointed at the most strategically important product in the semiconductor industry. Here's where the honest version of the story requires some calibration, because the version that says China has solved its memory problem and is about to overtake SK Hynix isn't what the evidence shows. CXMT faces real and significant technical obstacles. Without access to the most advanced lithography equipment, blocked by export controls, the company has to use a technique called multi-patterning to achieve what a single exposure pass would do for its competitors. That means more steps, more chances for errors to accumulate, and structurally lower yields at every node. Its high bandwidth memory yield rate isn't expected to reliably exceed 40% until the second half of 2026. By comparison, SK Hynix has been refining its HBM process for years and operates at dramatically higher efficiencies. And the industry standard is already moving to HBM4 and beyond, each generation pushing the frontier further ahead of where CXMT currently operates. There are stacking challenges too. High bandwidth memory isn't just a chip, it is multiple chips bonded together with extreme precision using through-silicon vias that run vertically through each die like microscopic elevator shafts. Getting the thermal stress, the bonding quality, and the signal integrity right across 8 or 12 stacked dies is a manufacturing problem that the Korean producers have been solving for years. CXMT is working through those same problems now, and some observers believe its HBM3 commercial mass production in 2026 remains uncertain. That's not a minor caveat, it's the central challenge. And yet, the argument that CXMT is irrelevant misreads what is actually happening, because in markets this concentrated, you don't need to be equal to the leader to change the dynamics. You need to be credible enough at the right time in the right product category to give buyers an alternative they're willing to consider. CXMT is already past that threshold in conventional memory and moving rapidly toward it in high bandwidth memory, exactly when the established suppliers are most stretched, most expensive, and most focused on their highest margin customers. The export controls placed on high bandwidth memory in late 2024 were designed to cap China's AI ambitions by cutting off the memory its accelerators depend on. What followed is worth noting carefully. Huawei developed its own proprietary memory architectures, branded internally, and built into its Ascend AI chips without a single imported component from an export-controlled supplier. CXMT redirected capital and factory capacity toward domestic high-bandwidth memory production, projecting output of roughly 7 million stacks from its own facilities in 2026, enough to supply approximately 600,000 AI chips performing at around the level of Nvidia's 2022 hardware. The restriction was meant to create a ceiling. The response has been to build inside it. That is the pattern this story fits into. A restriction lands. The expected outcome is constraint. The actual outcome is redirection, an enormous concentration of capital and engineering effort toward exactly the capability the restriction targeted. It doesn't always produce an equal result immediately. It doesn't need to. Semiconductor manufacturing knowledge compounds with every wafer. Every yield problem solved teaches something that can't be bought from a supplier or copied from a patent filing. Every customer contract generates data that improves the next production run. CXMT is not yet a world-class, high-bandwidth memory producer, but it is now a company with billions in revenue, a massive capital raise, a major Tencent supply agreement, and a factory in Shanghai being built specifically to produce the chip that sits at Nvidia's most exposed point in its supply chain. Here's my honest opinion for what it's worth. The thing that strikes me most about this story is not the specific numbers, it's the positioning. The global chip conversation has been almost entirely focused on transistors, who can print them smaller, who can access the machines that make them. And while that conversation has dominated every headline and driven billions in policy spending, the memory layer underneath those transistors has been quietly becoming the actual choke point. The shortage is real, the price surge is real, the gaming GPU cuts are real. And the company that just landed a $3 billion deal and is converting 60,000 wafers a month toward high bandwidth memory is real, whatever its current yield problems are. The lead that exists today is genuine. SK Hynix is years ahead in high bandwidth memory technology and has a supply relationship with Nvidia that essentially makes it the backbone of the AI hardware industry. That doesn't change overnight. but it also didn't look permanent in 2016 when CXMT was founded, and the distance has been closing ever since. Here's the question I'd genuinely like your take on. Were the high bandwidth memory export controls a smart strategic move, or did they force China to build a domestic memory industry that no future restriction can touch? Because there's a real argument on both sides. The controls may have slowed the timeline, but they also created the exact market conditions that are funding CXMT's expansion right now. Where do you land? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to keep following the moves that are reshaping the chip industry before the mainstream catches on, subscribe to the channel and like the video. There's a lot more coming